We're keeping youth front and center here at LPTV, including in our next session of programs dedicated to access to quality education in a disrupted world. Both global and learning disruptions come in many forms today, from conflict and increasing climate events to power cuts, and also to restricted internet access or access to hardware and new technologies. But there are many ways and many people working to overcome these challenges and to keep access to education open and available for everyone, whatever the circumstances. In the next hour and a half, we'll be hearing from a Syrian refugee who has built his own school in Lebanon, and from EdTech and European Commission representatives about creating equitable learning spaces online. It's going to be a packed and diverse series of discussions, but let's start by hearing from the co-founder of the Global Education Leaders Partnership, Valerie Hannon, whose research work is focused on learning ecosystems in the Global South, and who will be sharing her most recent findings with us during the festival. Welcome to the Learning Planet Festival, Valerie Hannon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I have a few minutes, I think, just to set out what a group of colleagues from a diverse set of organisations has been doing on this issue of access to quality education in a disrupted world. My interest, as has already been said, for some years has been in learning ecosystems. Plainly, if we are to make transformative education available, then the old models, the old paradigm is simply inadequate to the task. And a few years back, with colleagues at Innovation Unit, I published a study of learning ecosystems, which it was not intended to be entirely in the global north, but actually it was, just because they were at the sort of forefront of publicity in this field. What does that mean? It means educationists who came to the piece understanding that the formal systems of schooling, preschool, school itself, post-school and tertiary, are inadequate to the task. And to use the old phrase, it takes a village. So we need all kinds of providers, very diverse providers, with diverse ideas about the kind of models, pedagogical models, curriculum approaches that we need, and to bring basically all the assets of communities to the task. Well, that study was published by WISE a few years back, but it became apparent that the Global South was a space where the model of learning ecosystems was even more urgently required. And indeed, I personally was very influenced by the Brookings study. Some of you may know it, called Why Wait 100 Years? If you haven't read it, I really recommend you take a look at that. Why Wait 100 Years said, if the Global South continues simply to copy the schooling models of the global north, it will be 100 years until they reach the kinds of levels of standards and access that are currently enjoyed, if you can put it that way, by the global north. Something quite different was necessary. And it seemed to us that learning ecosystems, I say again, those incorporating all the assets, all the powers of a community, are what is necessary. So over the last year, a group of us with Learning Planet have been looking at learning ecosystems in the global south, in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America. And these are really extraordinary organizations, in my view, dependent quite frequently on highly visionary leadership, which take a quite different approach. It says, what assets does any community have to bring to the party in terms of creating new pathways for learning in circumstances of acute adversity? And, you know, when we talk about adversity, we often think, well, we mean poverty. But what became apparent in this study was the many and various ways in which adversity disadvantages learners. That could, of course, involve poverty, almost always does. But we're also talking about environmental disruption. We're talking about refugee conditions, about post-Civil War, or indeed existing Civil War conditions, drug-related violence, and gang cultures. So young people trying to find a learning pathway in such cultures cannot rely on formal schooling systems or the opportunities offered by a state which is frequently itself highly challenged and simply not up to the task to offer the richness of opportunities necessary. So we've been looking at a range of organizations trying to work in those circumstances. To give you some examples, they include what's going on in New Delhi, which is an extraordinarily interesting effort to create a learning ecosystem involving many partners and many players alongside the schooling system too. In Latin America, organizations like Misangre in Colombia and Fundación Misangre, that is, and also Encash in Peru. And in Ghana, the work of the Jacobs Foundation, creating a very interesting set of learning ecosystems involving multiple partners to create new kinds of pathways. What we are learning, we're about to publish in a report. That report will be previewed this Thursday on the Learning Planet Festival. We think the findings are usable and I think highly inspiring, because basically what these organizations are doing is creating completely new pedagogical models, which don't work from a kind of assumption of deficit in communities, but look at how to bring the assets of communities fully to bear on the task of creating fantastic new pathways for learners in highly, highly adverse circumstances. So thank you very much for that opportunity to preview, and do join us on Thursday to hear about the findings of our research work.
Thank you, Valerie. It's been great having you back at the festival again this year, and we look forward to hearing about your research and for you to reveal everything that your research has shown. Now, you've probably heard of Doctors Without Borders, but did you know that there is an organization called Libraries Without Borders? Our next guest is the Director of Education, Impact and Research at Libraries Without Borders, which is an international non-profit that strengthens the capacity of people in vulnerable situations by providing access to education, culture, and information. Active in more than 50 countries, Libraries Without Borders operates innovative cultural and learning spaces for those affected by crisis. It enables them to learn, to play, to build communities, and to be empowered and to plan to construct their futures. To tell us more about what Libraries Without Borders is doing everywhere from Bangladesh to Ukraine, let's now welcome Muy-Cheng Peich to LPTV. Muy-Cheng, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kristen, and very nice meeting you all. I'm really happy to be part of the Learning Festival, Learning Planet Festival. It's just a great opportunity. So thank you very much for highlighting our work, and first of all, for organizing this festival so that we can all share practices, which is much too rare in this sector. So my name is Muy-Cheng Peich, and I'm the Education, Impact and Research Director at Libraries Without Borders, which is an organization that was created 15 years ago by the historian Patrick Vey and our current General Executive Director, Jeremy Lachelle, with the ambition to empower vulnerable populations through access and accessibility of knowledge. If I were to synthesize our mandate, I would say that we really strongly believe that access to knowledge, access to information, to education are great levers for the development of human societies. And what we do is that we try to increase, to improve both access and accessibility to knowledge. It's not because someone has access to a library that the knowledge is accessible, simply because the library can be really far away. There can also be a lot of social, psychological, symbolical barriers that prevent someone from actually accessing knowledge. Today, there are two, I would say, challenges that are prompting our work. The first one is this concept of informational security, this idea that access to reliable, verified information is essential for everyone, and especially for populations on the move, for populations in very challenging situations, regardless of whether it's a conflict, it's a climatic disaster, it's a pandemic. Having access to reliable information enables people to make informed decisions and to be actors of change themselves. And this is true, of course, for refugees, for instance, fleeing their country, but it is also true for youth in France or youth in high-income countries for accessing information through social network, through the media, and who need to be able to be critical and to be able to verify, decipher the true from the false. So informational security is something that is essential for us. The second part, and I think you will all relate to that, is this idea of building learning societies, of making sure that everyone has the means to be actors of change, has the that we can increase the sense of agency of everyone, including vulnerable populations, because the solutions will come from communities themselves who are facing the challenges and who are the ones who know best the context, the communities, the local challenges. And so these two big issues, informational security and the idea of creating a learning society, are the fundamental basis on which we're doing our work. As Christine said, we're today operating in about 50 countries in very a wide range of situations, from humanitarian context, people fleeing conflicts or fleeing a disaster, to context of development of middle and low income countries where infrastructures may lack, where access to connectivity may be lacking, to high-income countries where we're facing other challenges, fighting social inequalities and inequalities in terms of access and accessibility to knowledge. Today, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our work, and as well tell you a little bit more about some of the examples of our work in the field. If I were to be schematic, I would say that there are three pillars of intervention within Libraries Without Borders. The first one is creating tools that enable us to project the library where it's needed, but where it may not be. And we really see the library as much more than just shelves of books. We see that as an incubator of change, a place where you can meet people that you may not meet usually in your daily life because they come from another socioeconomic background, a place where ideas can emerge, a place where you can access information, but also create information. So libraries for us, it's that. And we have created tools such as, for instance, the Ideas Box, a portative media center that can be deployed about anywhere in 20 minutes. That creates a local hub for learning, playing, creating content, etc. And so this first one is the tools that enable us to bring the library where it's needed, but where it's not. But the core of our work is actually content curation, carefully curating content that is adapted to the local context, tailored to the needs of the populations that we're serving in terms of languages, of thematics, but most importantly, providing the tools to communities so that they can create their own content and make their voices heard and share the solutions that are created locally. And third, the third pillar of our work is what we would call facilitation. So this idea of building bridges between the people who need the content and the content in itself. And that goes through partnering with local organizations and international organizations, training them, building capacity locally so that the projects can be sustainable. I'll perhaps just talk to you about what we did in Haiti just after the earthquake. So we were working there just before the earthquake happened, working with university libraries to build a network of libraries that could share practices, that could share content, etc. Then the earthquake happened, and we actually flew back to Paris thinking that we were not a humanitarian NGO and that there were other primary needs that were more essential. And it's actually our Haitian partners in the field who called us back saying, what you did, we're creating spaces where the information is reliable, where people can lead a normal life and build their dignity, is actually even more essential now in a humanitarian crisis than it was before. And this is not something that we humanitarian workers know how to do. And so we came back and we simply just created library in the tents with books and volunteers. And these places became very impactful, very interesting in terms of how they became the hub where populations knew that the information that was distributed there was reliable. And these became also places where psychologists could come, observe kids, and identify those who needed really more tending, who needed psychosocial support. And so that's how we came up with the idea of an Ideas Box, this media center that could be deployed about anywhere and that could really help us bring this dimension of intellectual the intellectual dimension, basically, of the human being in a vulnerable situation. And so today we have about 170 ideas box deployed across the world, in Burundi, in Bangladesh, but also in Ukraine, where we intervened just after the beginning of the conflict and created these safe spaces where children and women could have access to a normal life, basically, get out of the conflict and be children again and parents again, but also places where they could access verified information about the migration routes, but also about administrative procedures, etc. And I think today, I'm really happy to be here with you today, because I feel like the challenges that we're facing today can only be solved if we act as a community. And we know at Libraries Without Borders that it's not our work that will be impactful. It's actually the work of thousands of people who can carry this mandate, that access to information, access to knowledge is essential to enable local communities to create their own content, to create their own knowledge and make their voices heard, and share this knowledge created locally so that it becomes universal. And perhaps I end on that, is that we have also this strong advocacy around curating local content, because too many of the content of the resources that are created for education in low-income countries actually come from high-income countries without taking into account the local specificities of the context in which we're intervening. And so this idea of contextualizing, but also of creating locally and promoting local knowledge so that it becomes universal, is something that really drives us. And I stop there. Thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to hearing all the other interventions. Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you, Ed.
Cheng, for telling us about your work at Libraries Without Borders. This is something that speaks directly to our topic here on LPTV right now, that being access to quality education in a disrupted world. I know that Libraries Without Borders will also be featured on Imagination TV at 9 o'clock Central European Time tomorrow. So if you want to hear more from Muy-Cheng and her colleagues, be sure to join her at that event. Now, we're going to continue to engage with some real-world game changers and learn about their actions to ensure quality education is available to everyone. Our next guest lost everything, including access to school, when he fled Syria to become a refugee at the age of 12. Determined not to fall behind in his studies, Mohamad Jounde decided to take action and started his own school that now welcomes around 200 children and young refugees every single day. I've got Ed Stevenette back in the studio, and now let's go over to Mohamad, who is joining us in conversation with Ed. Over to you guys to share Mohamad's story.
Thanks so much, Kristen. Mohamad, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you. First question to begin with, you start and built a school at the age of 12 to favour access to children. What prompted you to do this?
First of all, thank you so much for having me on the festival. I think one of the main things is that I've quickly realized once I sought refuge in Lebanon, in a foreign country that I don't have a community of my own in, is that the fastest way to be able to establish this community to myself and to other kids around me were to start a school. Because, you know, it's the answer is simpler than we think it is, because as a 12 years old kid, I can, like, even yourself, Ed, like, where did you make friends? You know, where was your own place, your own community outside home? It was mostly your school, because you're 12 and that's the nature of life. So it was really about that. We just wanted to create a community for ourselves, another home, if I may call, where we can feel comfortable expressing ourselves and just pursuing our passions and all those things. So that's where it all started. When you become a refugee, everything is taken away from you, including your community, including your home, and you seek it to find somewhere else. We decided to build one instead of find one. So that's why we started the school. We built it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And you've spoken before around the incredible strength of young refugees. Where does education come in supporting them as well to further build that strength on the day-to-day basis?
I mean, for sure, education helps them realize their potential and maybe further it. Now, I'm always careful answering this question Because first, understanding education as not just like learning the basics, how to write and how to read, but more the holistic sense, expressing yourself, expressing your passions, whether it's art, whether it's music. So education as a whole and education in life as well. It definitely allowed them to make sense of their identities and also gain back their agency as refugees. Because overall, the situation with refugees, especially during the Syrian refugee crisis, was that refugees were portrayed in two different ways in the overall media or by communities, either as weak and in need of help or as dangerous and harming the economy or the areas that they live in or anything. So they were really stripped down from their agency, from their identity. Those identities were imposed on them, whether it's helpless or dangerous. Education is one of those very strong and important tools that helps those young refugees, especially the children, to acknowledge, to realize to their own identity and to also gain back their agency in the way they can express themselves. However, as I said, I'm always careful answering this question because education alone does not help refugees. We in the school in Lebanon, and I think everyone has been aware of for example, the port explosion in Lebanon and the current economical situation in Lebanon. And this is something that is not unique to Lebanon, but most countries where refugee resides are not stable countries. Um, when we as educationer or as like people who work in the education field, we always face the issue of trying to make sense teaching them education while we can't guarantee them a future because of the country that they are residing in is also very unstable. And this is a dilemma that we're always facing, is like, what is the point of education if a future is very uncertain? So I always answer that the education is important in the day-to-day life today because it gives those kids a break. It gives them the tools for them to feel powerful throughout the day, that in case in the future they have opportunities and the potentials, they would be able to explore those potentials. But education alone does not guarantee a future for those refugees. More further efforts are needed.
Thanks so much, Mohamad, and for really giving that full picture as well. I think it's really, really important as well to qualify that question. Maybe just a closing one for you, looking ahead to 2023 and thinking of the audience that will be watching this globally as well. What are the ways in which we can support the education of refugees, knowing, as you say, that it's only a small part of the challenge that they face?
For sure. I mean, there is individual ways you can help as a person living wherever around the world. Is now refugees are in most parts of the world, so you can just seek out to any person that you've seen is a refugee and is struggling in school, whether it's with the language barrier, especially here in Europe. I currently reside in Sweden, and I see a lot of my fellow refugees struggling with the language barrier, whether it's Swedish or English. And you can always reach out to those, ask if there's anything that you can support. You can help them with their school, just for them not to feel that education is something impossible to receive because of this very simple language barrier, that you as a native speaker or as a speaker of whatever language, you can assist them with that. And just be a person that they would feel comfortable with. Refugees at the end of the day are still people, especially children. They're so open. They have their own lives. They have their own personalities. They're very open for people. They're just afraid of others because of the experiences they went to. So just presenting yourself as a person who they can be comfortable with, is something that is very important and can actually lead to a drastic change. On a more of a bigger level, of course, it's always good to try to volunteer, donate, go to the refugee camps if that's a possibility, and try to learn about the lives of the refugees from the refugees themselves, rather than reading on them on the social media or on media, because those things are biased, they're politically charged. So form your own ideas, form your own pictures of what the refugee struggle is and what the refugees' power are. And that's to close the answer. It's the most important thing on both individual and a higher level, is to understand that refugees are powerful agents that are capable of change. They just need the opportunities to explore that potential. And we can offer them those opportunities, whether to assist them with their language or whatever they need to help, or with going and learning their stories themselves.
Thanks to Mohamad for sharing his inspiring story with us here at the festival and for showing us how we can look to youth for inspiration and ways of acting to bring positive change even in the most difficult circumstances. Continuing the subject of access to quality education and information, I have a question for you and I'd love you to share with us and tell us, what are your most trusted sources of information? Flash the QR code on the screen or tell us, the QR code is on our website, and tell us what is your most trusted source? Is it your friends and family? Maybe the internet and social media? Do you look to national and local news channels? Or is it teachers and scientists that you trust? When you've answered that question, take a second to share your thoughts on our other questions in the survey. And don't forget to encourage your friends to take those questions soon. I'll share the feedback on everyone's responses in just a few minutes. Now, let's continue our deep dive into the topic of access to quality education in a disrupted world. And we head now to South Africa, where our next guest, Isobel Frye, is the Executive Director of the Social Policy Initiative. This is a research think and do tank working to create a fair society where people have all they need to live active, productive, and dignified lives. Isobel, welcome to LPTV.
Thank you so much, Isa.
Great, thanks so much, Ed. Isobel, you're on LPTV. Over to you.
Thank you, and greetings to all from SPI, Social Policy Initiative. I would like, just before I start my address, to ask everybody to have a moment silent for the human rights defenders in Eswatini, the country formerly known as Swaziland, as they're currently facing severe repression. And we're hearing some dreadful stories there. Thank you. I've been asked to speak about quality education in a disrupted world. And I think that South Africa provides a very good insight into the impact of disruption on quality and especially equality. Now, in South Africa, Section 28 of our Constitution gives to all the right to education and the right to basic education. This is the only socioeconomic right that is not subject to progressive realization. So in other words, everybody has an immediate right to quality universal education, primary and secondary education. Section 7.2 of the Constitution actually places a positive obligation on the state. So not only to respect and protect this right, but also to promote and fulfill. Now, South Africa, just to give you a bit of a background, since 1994, when of course apartheid came to an end, we're facing structural poverty and inequality, and this has a huge impact on quality education. And I would argue that inequality is a permanent disruption. So we know that education is globally a ladder for mobility and opportunity, but South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. And the ladders of mobility and immobility lie at the heart of this entrenched inequality. As an upper middle income country, which South Africa is, 56% of South Africans live in poverty, and 25%, basically a quarter of our population, live below the food poverty line, which is essentially meaning that a quarter of our population lives in starvation. So why is this constitutional right to education not achieving the change income almost 30 years into democracy? Is government not realizing its obligations? We could say that on the face of it, progress is good. The last general survey with 2020 figures showed that 70% of learners in South Africa attend schools which are fee-free. 90% of learners in one of the provinces with high unemployment are able to attend school without paying school fees. In the same year, 80% of learners who attended public schools received a free meal. And in 2020, 77% of people aged 5 to 25 were in educational institutions. So where is the problem? Again, I bring back our attention to the fact that the rampant and runaway inequality that is perpetuated by institutions. And in South Africa, race and class are still closely interlinked. Last year, South Africa had an unemployment rate of 43% for youth aged 15 to 24 who are not in employment, education, and training. This is as high as 72%. 23% of the employed attended tertiary education, compared to 9% of the formerly unemployed and 4% of the not economically active. So we can see that in terms of mobility, tertiary education is definitely a gateway and also a gatekeeper for people who are emerging from secondary school. Now, while state support exists for primary and secondary school, it's much more difficult for poor Black learners to access quality tertiary education, which is not subject to the immediate realization by the state. So, for instance, while 81% of South Africans are Black, in 2020, only 5.7% of Black school leavers were in an institution of higher learning. This is compared to 23% for people of Indian or Asian descent and 22% for whites in South Africa. So there is a strong correlation between who you are and what your life path will be. In this tight stranglehold of exclusion, inequality masks the deep levels of poverty in both rural and urban areas. Despite a single school meal per day, it is difficult to concentrate at school when you're hungry and you've worked so far. So I think I would just like to talk about the two challenges for better education and then tie it up in some suggested solutions. The first poverty, the main challenge is poverty. So the South African state provides means-tested cash grants to 12.8 million children under 18. So it's almost 13 million children. And while that is a significant coverage, the means testing of the grant means that the households are living in poverty, but the value of the grant is very little. It's 480 Rand per month, which is only 72% of the food poverty line. It's about $29 per month. So we can see the correlation of poverty is that in the last figures that we have for malnutrition, 30% of boys under 5, 25% of girls under 5 are malnourished. And that has an impact on cognitive abilities as people grow older, and it cannot be remedied. So poverty is definitely something which needs to be addressed. And then inequality of quality of education. South Africa has both public and private schooling. There are tiers in the public schooling. So the former white suburbs are very different to the rural and township schools where working class Black children attend. The suburb schools charge high fees and operate on catchment areas. So if you are poor, you will only be attending the suburb. If your mother is probably a live-in domestic worker in the area and her employer contributes to your school fees, privilege, as we can see, is intergenerational, and so is exclusion. The quality of education at many of the fee-free schools is appalling. So while we have access, the quality is bad. Despite the fact that the state spends 18% of its national budget on education, in a 2020 global survey on quality education, South Africa ranked 75 out of the 76 countries that participated in this OECD survey. Only 56% of people who start school at a public school exit with a school leaving qualification. So the elite prosper and the poor don't. Private school fees can vary, but can be 3.5 times more than the national minimum wage, which means it's beyond the reach of the majority of the employed, let alone the many unemployed. So just looking at disruption and what this means, COVID-19 was a true determinant of difference. Schools closed across the country for at least 9 months, and some staying closed at half capacity for 18 months. During this closure, no school meals were given to people, and so their one meal guaranteed disappeared overnight with no ability or desire by the schools to try and bag and grab as we suggested they should do. During this period, only 6.4% of schools in South Africa offered remote or home-based learning during this lockdown period. So for the majority of children, this is just a lost period. And each challenge affects the rich and poor differently. Currently, South Africa is facing now 2 years of electricity blackouts. Rich schools have generators, but poor schools just close each day. The last generations of South Africa's turbulent past continue, but with less visibility and greater tragedy. So is the solution to close private schooling, leading on the social policy maxim that programs for the poor are always poor programs? Have cabinet ministers and civil servants, should they be obliged to send their children only to state schools, Or is this determinant harmful on the rights of their children who currently attend private schooling? And so in conclusion, the work that my institute does on promoting a universal decent basic income grant, we believe is crucial for addressing poverty and hunger and also addressing inequality. A universal decent basic income grant, funded in part by a wealth tax to reduce inequality, should in part bring people closer to solutions. Redistribution of income will enable people to have demand for SMME supply. That is currently not the case. And finally, index grant income to poverty and well-being lines, and possibly consider incentivizing teachers and schools that do perform. And so in closing, we can see in my country that the change that political freedom brought about, sadly, is not yet changing the lives of people. And we do hope that the level and quality of education will improve as more and more people pay attention to it. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Frye, for joining us, and thank you to everyone who responded to our questions. We asked, what source of information do you trust the most? Friends and family, the internet, social media, national news channels, or is it teachers and scientists? I have the results here, and I can say that overwhelmingly 48% of you have responded. It's to teachers and scientists that you trust the most. That's a great response. If you want to respond to any of our questions at any time, simply flash the QR code or click the link next to the live stream on the festival homepage. It's that easy. And if you want to ask us anything, you can connect to our Discord server from the button on the homepage too. We love hearing from you and helping you find what you're looking for here at the festival and connecting you to others in our community. So do connect with us and chat on our Discord. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel to get free replays, and you can follow us on social media to get the alerts of everything that's coming up next here at the Learning Planet Festival. Now, we've just heard about some great initiatives to support learning in times of conflict and crisis. But even when we're in a safe environment, we need to take care that our digital learning spaces are accessible and equitable too. The Convention on the Rights of the Child says that every child has the right to an education. And here at Learning Planet, we believe that education and learning should be accessible to all throughout their entire lives. Today, more and more learning takes place using digital tools and spaces, yet the digital divide still exists, along with many other inequalities, as well as access and sharing of data concerns. With my next guests, we're going to explore how we can inscribe what we've learned about creating inclusive and safe digital learning spaces into policies that platforms can practice, that governments can enforce, and that parents and students can understand. Joining me now, please welcome Iris Abraham, who is the Communications and Policy Advisor at the Cabinet of the Vice President for Democracy and Demography at the European Commission. We also have Mart Arrow, who is the co-founder of the Nordic EdTech Forum, N8, and DreamApply.com, and Sebastian Berger, who's the Executive Director of the Global Student Forum. Welcome to you all. It's great to have you with us. Iris, you have very many years of experience in crafting policy, including surrounding children's rights, protection, and empowerment. And I believe you're joining from Belgium today. Mart, you're joining from Estonia. You bring with you an extensive experience working with EdTech and digital learning platform developers. And Sebastian, welcome. You and Global Student Forum represent 2 million students and learners of all ages from around the world. Where are you from, Sebastian? From Belgium today?
But usually in Belgium. I have a feeling. Weird thing.
Okay.
Maybe that will be resolved later.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you too, Sebastian, but we will fix that. I want to turn first to you, Iris, and ask, why is policy important? What is the role of policy in creating equity, and how can it help us to bring equality into digital learning spaces?
Thank you very much, Kristen, and thanks a lot for organizing this event. And it's really a true pleasure to be here, and also was able to listen a little bit to the other panels. I think policy in general, and I come from the more institutional point of view, either the multilateral institutions or here the European Union institutions, we really look at the universality of rights. This is our approach, and this is where policy can help. That is the premise from which we really start, to ensure that everyone is being treated equally and fairly, that we can sort of, through our policies, create a culture of inclusion and respect for all. And what is really key, particularly as a public policy institution, that we can help create policy that provides equal access and opportunities for all citizens. So I just want to go a little bit in those 3 points where we believe that policy really plays a key role. And there's, of course, very much links to the topic we're discussing today, and to how the universality of rights obviously applies online, offline, and particularly also to children.
Thank you. You mentioned the digital divide, addressing the gaps. Iris, can you hear me?
Now
Let's
I can.
see if you can hear me. Okay. That's okay. We'll make it work. You mentioned the digital divide, addressing the gaps. Beyond that, what about for children and youth, lifelong learners, young mums? We need to think not just about students here. There's a whole range of learners out there. I see Sebastian nodding his head also. Mart, what is the role of policy for you in helping create equality?
Well, hello everybody. First, it's really a pleasure to see you today. The role of policy is, of course, to do everything what Iris was already mentioning as well, to make sure that everybody would have the access to high quality learning opportunities. But I am today wearing a bit of the hat of the innovators and people that have ideas of how to make education better. And of course, the policy work is very important from this angle as well, because the education system as a whole is owned by the governments, and without the governments engaging with the innovators actively, it's very, very difficult for the innovators to support development of learning opportunities that would be relevant for the specific target audiences out there. For example, as you mentioned, young moms, I believe there is many young moms listening to us at the moment. So we definitely need more solutions that are able to build very flexible learning opportunities that are easily scheduled into the young moms' schedules. And without these solutions, it's probably not as fun for them to learn, because going to university today, for example, for a young mother, can be very complicated, starting from the challenges with daycare and maybe even challenges with financing the studies.
Certainly. So, Iris, you told us about the digital divide and addressing the gaps and inequality. Mart, you've highlighted that learners out there, it's not just the youth and the students. We're also talking about micro learners, young mothers. And in fact, when we talk about equality, it's how do we ensure that everyone out there can access in a safe way? And I think it's about creating those safe learning spaces. Iris, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, actually, because I just only, when I spoke in the beginning, set a bit the general stage, yes. But I would like to come in obviously on some clear policy initiatives that are there, that also highlight the points you just address the points you just mentioned. So we really come from the child rights perspective from the premise that child rights offline applies, so online. You've mentioned here UNCRC, UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And in 2021, the UN, with actually the support of many digital child rights organizations, adopted the General Comment 25. And this is really a departing premise for our work, meaning child rights offline and online are the same. So this underpins all our work also at the Commission. In 2021, the Commission has presented the Digital Education Action Plan. Now, this is quite an important plan, and this really applies across the board, from the young to the old. It really goes through across all generations, and that addresses the different needs. The key points are really fostering the development of high-performing digital education and really developing this ecosystem. And the second part is enhancing the digital skills and competencies for the transformation. And I think all of this also is developed in the context of COVID-19. And I really want to come in because this accelerated the need to develop this digital and safe ecosystem, because we really saw that education moved online for many, many children. It's been a steep rise. We see now, and data has that European children spend an estimated 6 to 7.5 hours per day online. This is really enormous. And this includes all devices, from cell phones to computers to everything. Children with smartphones even more. We also really have taken this into account when developing our Better Internet for Kids strategy, which is the digital arm of the EU Child Rights Strategy. And there we ensure that every child in the EU is protected, empowered, and respected online. But this also has a very much a global dimension. And within those strategy, we really address different points. Respecting online, meaning helping children actually to navigate online, to understand how the online world functions and how the industry can respect their rights online and their needs. This is why also for the first time, we are making recommendations clearly to the industry to work with the digital industry, from TikTok to Facebook to YouTube and many other providers. We are looking at how we can involve children, empower them in the design process of age-appropriate design material, which is really key. This is also a way to address specific abilities and needs, which is one of the points you've also mentioned. And we really look at the safe space. How can we promote effective age-appropriate verification tools, and how countries also exchange good practices for media literacy education. So we really try to address all the different parts, and certainly the digital divide as well, where we try to set up different tools for children to access the online world. We have a number of safer internet centers in each member states where children can freely access online, have training, and also globally, there are actually quite a few tools that exist. I leave it as such, but I just want to say on the policy point, we've really taken all the emerging challenges very much into consideration. And we really looked at in the global digital transition, but also, which is one of the key priorities of the European Union right now, and children and young people are included.
I'm going to come back to you in just a second, actually, because I want to hear a little bit more about some of the things we've learned and some of the best practices we've put into place. But you mentioned the number of hours that children and youth and learners are spending online now. And I want to turn to Sebastian. Sebastian, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Okay. I want to ask you, with your community of millions of learners out there, how concerned are students and learners about the policy that protects them, maybe at a government, institutional or organizational level, and about the power of this policy to enable their access, but also to protect them and their data? Is this something that the students are concerned about?
Yeah, I think policy is obviously important to ensure that the further digitalization of learning takes place with the concerns and aspirations of all relevant stakeholders in mind. And that is not only students in formal education, as you would previously said, but learners of all kinds in all sectors of education. In the best case scenario, this means that teachers and learners, and potentially in the best case scenario, their democratically elected representatives are involved in these policy-making initiatives at all levels and stages of development. For us, the digitalization of education is not really a goal in itself, but we believe it can be used as a means to achieve other goals, such as raising accessibility, but also when it comes to internationalizations of our institutions and the question of sustainability. But when we talk about policies that regard equality, we need to start at the very basic level, coming from a global perspective with member unions in Latin America and Asia Pacific, in Africa. the question is really, do we have access to digital learning tools, to laptops, to phones, to tablets? And in case we have these tools, do we have stable internet access? Working with these 200 national unions of students from across the world, we know that it is a luxury that many young people, unfortunately, simply do not enjoy. So if we create equitable learning spaces and policies, we really need to take into account that we do not leave any learners behind because of these mere technical requirements. But I think we also need capacity building for students and staff concerned with improving their digital skills and using digital tools. Otherwise, I think that digitalization bears the danger of increasing inequality instead of reducing it. And one last point in relation to that, I think that means we cannot only train teachers technically, but we need to think completely new ways of pedagogical training in order to create high quality educational content. And that needs to be embedded in the further and continuous academic and professional development of educators on all levels. And one last point that I wanted to address here when we talk about policy, intellectual property, and when we see what the WIPO is doing, and how much money has been spent by learners on accessing the most basic learning resources. That's something to take into account, I think, in the next 10 years, how we're going to deal with intellectual property rights of learning materials. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Sebastian. And I think in there you've also highlighted the number of different ways in which policy can act to help with equality, be it access to the hardware, resources for teachers, resources for students, and in the intellectual property also. So I want to now look at what we have learned about creating inclusive and safe spaces. Iris, you mentioned some examples, but I want to hear now from you of examples of a success, of the best practices, real life, what's working out there. Mart, I think you have an example of something that's happening, give online access to quality education and quality learning from Finland. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There is actually a lot of different examples all across the globe out there already. And I'm trying to keep an eye on what's the most interesting things that are happening. And I'm just to elaborate the story a little bit, that I'm very happy that the European Commission and quite a few governments are working on improving the ecosystem for innovators that have ideas of how to make something better about learning. And we need to make sure that people that have these great ideas would be able to realize them. Today, the policy, for example, can be challenging in the areas of for example, how can your average learner get access to these really great solutions that are already out there. Because we need to also make sure that if a small team decides to build a really great solution, for example, to help to learn reading for dyslexic children, then that these team members would be also able to make a living out of the work that they're putting in, because making this kind of innovations is a lot of work.
Yeah, definitely.
But yes, going to this Finnish example that we brought out, there is a really great example of University of Jyväskylä researchers building a new methodology for helping dyslexic children with learning reading. And it started from the fact that Jyväskylä University is a teacher training university. So they had this very logical question of why it is so hard for dyslexic children to learn reading. And they used neurosciences to research what happens in the human brain when people that have dyslexia are trying to learn reading. And it came out that it was very hard for these children to understand what was happening. So it was a mess basically in their head. And so they were having another very good question of, okay, maybe we can find a better way to support these learners. And with a bit of research, they indeed found a much better way. The university didn't have the resources or the capacity to make it into a product that could be used by the children in need. And they were thankfully introduced to a Finnish startup in education that was willing to design it into a nice and user-friendly learning game that is called the Grapho game. And by now, more than 3 million children from across the world have benefited from it. I've looked at research also done by Cambridge University on this concrete innovation. And very, very briefly put, it helps the learner on a similar level to one-on-one teacher training. So it's a very good example of really great cooperation between universities, academia, and private sector startups developing valuable solutions that are really cheap to use and accessible in the end, and actually help teachers with children that have very specific learning needs.
Mart, thank you so much for that precise example from the Nordics. I'm going to take us up to the global level now with Iris and look at some examples, best practices, what's really working. When we chatted beforehand, Iris, you mentioned that there have been some great examples of global frameworks that have now been put into place to help us create more equality in digital learning spaces. Can you tell us a little bit more about those, maybe in the Declaration of Digital Principles?
Yes, thank you very much. The Declaration of Digital Principles and Rights is a declaration that was adopted, presented by the EU last year, but it has obviously the internet has no borders, so it has a very clear global guidelines as well. And this declaration really covers the key rights and principles for the digital age, and that this affects us all. And accompanies us, the EU, but also governments, the industry, everyone involved in creating and building this space in their everyday lives. So some key principles were that, and this is also what Sebastian mentioned before, that affordable and high-speed digital connectivity is everywhere, because we have a global digital divide, and that's really key. We also can look at, for example, the Global Gateway Initiative of the European Commission, which really, really covers particularly the Global South and beyond, and has bridging the global digital divide as a very strong pillar, which also, of course, the adequate funding and initiatives behind it. We're looking that everyone is well equipped, from classrooms and digital skilled teachers. You spoke about capacity building, the access to public services. We see more and more that for all ages, anything linked to public services, from identity card to connection to your health platform, everything works now online. So this requires also the skills, the safe environment for children, which is really key, which is something we've been working on very strongly to ensure that online spaces are child-friendly, that are safe, because when we developed our strategies, also the Better Internet for Kids, we actually involve children. And this is a key part also when we look at what works. And I would like to highlight that we made child participation actually, and we look until 18, but also then later, of course, 18 plus. We make this a key part of our work. That means we consult children already as of the age of 11 on our policies, and their feedback really helps us design what works. And then we're sure that it actually works, it makes sense, it's tailor-made to their needs. And many of these children highlighted the part of safety and feeling comfortable online is a key concern, and that they want to be part of the development. Because often, if you look at the industry, online tools are being developed and then tested on children to see whether it works. Now what we're doing, we're calling on the industry, and we had success with it. We had a Safer Internet Forum in Brussels in October, where the key industry was present. And they're really now teaming up to develop the online tools already from the outset together with children. This is something that works, and this is something that works across the board. And I think this is something we really, really need to focus on, because it addresses actually everything we're talking about across the board. It's about inclusion, it's about equality, it's about addressing different needs and abilities, and it's about educating, empowering, and teaching children, but also then their caretakers, how to navigate and how to create this very safe and equitable learning space. Mm-hmm. So this is where the global, the Declaration of Principles really looks at, but then we continue on the child rights strategy with a better internet for kids on it. And of course, I mean, on a global level, you're all very familiar with UNICEF's work, I'm sure, in this field. And there are many, many initiatives they have. They have the Learning Passport, they have Global Kids Online Disrupting Harm. So there are more and more partners that also the EU has across the board globally, where we set up really safe spaces for children. We have the capacity building, we have the inclusive aspects in there. And I mean, I could speak long, but we have limited time. But just to say, there are global frameworks are set, and we really do not work in silos anymore. We work across the board and ensure the synergies are about, all around.
Thank you to Mart for giving us the Scandinavian perspective, and Iris there for that more global perspective, and also telling us about how you're bringing and dialing up inclusivity in the creation of policies. I read somewhere that the clarity of purpose informs clarity of policies. So certainly bringing everyone into their creation. There's some great examples of what's happening there. I want to ask all three of you now, how can we support the people with the great ideas, the great tech ideas, the innovators, the educationists, the teachers, the ed tech people, the students even, anyone out there that wants to improve education and create more equitable learning tools and spaces? How can we help them? Sebastian, do you have a perspective maybe from the students and teachers of what we can be doing more of to help?
I think for innovations in digitalization to be accepted by the whole educational community, the ideas need to be discussed, implemented, and also evaluated together with teachers, with students, in order to gain community support for new tools, for new policies. And I think top-down approaches, no matter how good the people or the ideas, won't bring the same results and effective partnerships with educational institutions and learners. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all model to enhance digitalization, and in each target, each innovation, each initiative should be reviewed against the added value it actually brings to students without implementing tools which are not fit for purpose or not tested yet. So if you want to support people with great ideas around digitalization of education, I think we also need funding. And I know that the European institutions are doing a lot in that regard with dedicated grants to develop and test new systems. But we also need to make sure, I think, that important developments and great ideas that are relevant in the realm of education are not being overslapped. For example, one thing that is very, very central right now in the Discord is this ChatGPT program from OpenAI, which is astonishingly accurate. If you have not used it yet, you can check it out. It's quite scary. It really allows for completely new ways of plagiarism and cheating. And I think we as an educational community cannot stand by and just see these things developing, but need to find effective answers to that. So I think we'll see much more fascinating and disrupting technology from the edtech sector in the future, and that's something I think policy from institutions and governments need to take into account.
Sebastian, thank you. Let me turn to Mart with this same question. What can we do to help the educated innovators out there to improve quality education online? Is it about ensuring there are more people that are actually part of this process, maybe?
Absolutely. So what I've seen in my work, I've been working with education innovation for about 20 years now, is that there is amazing people with amazing ideas all over the world that usually are common people, like you or me, or our classmate, or a parent, or a mother, or a teacher, and there is so many different inspired people out there, and they might have a very specific idea of how can we support hyperactive children with learning multiplication table better, or how can we support people that cannot see with learning and having access and inclusivity to learning opportunities. And I've been working very closely with the Estonian government on this, and we call it the ecosystem development for education innovation. And the goal is specifically to look exactly at what are the barriers on the way of people that would like to contribute to education development. And there are, let's say, three concrete activities that we have done to support these people. And one of them is firstly, of course, to bring people together that have ideas. So they would start sharing ideas with each other, learn from each other, and we call it kind of cross-pollination of ideas. So the ideas would actually improve in quality. And then secondly, there are initiatives like hackathons that have a very specific goal of bringing people together that have ideas. So in 48 hours, these people would try to make a prototype of their ideas together with other like-minded people. And because what we've seen otherwise is that people with great ideas might just be sitting and waiting for something and for decades, and the idea is not realized, and it's not getting in the hands of the teachers and learners who actually would benefit from having this solution for themselves. Mm-hmm. And the third example is a co-creation program where we have a university that has expertise in education, bringing in the theoretical knowledge of how to develop learning opportunities. Then we have the innovators that come in with their ideas of what they would like to build. And then we have the teachers or practitioners who are supporting and working together with innovators and giving them feedback on a daily basis on how they feel about the new idea being developed.
Mm-hmm. Iris, how about yourself? How can we support the people with the great ideas out there that are looking to create more equitable learning spaces? I know you mentioned about sharing some of the good policies and practices that you're seeing. How are you doing that?
Sharing definitely is one part, and the co-creation that Mark just mentions is key. And as I said before, this is really becoming a premise in our work, where we reach out and to the younger generation, make sure that we find ways to consult them from the get-go. We set up particular focus group together with the child rights and grassroots organizations. And this is also key, what was mentioned before, that it's not the top down. I think if you want our policies to be effective, you need to make sure that they're tailor-made and they really meet the needs and they reflect reality. And this is why this outreach to schools, to community groups, to children, also from the marginalized communities are really, really key, because everyone has different needs. If you look also, we did a lot of work on the Better Internet for Kids, but child rights strategy with children from migrant communities, for example. There are different language needs there. There are different needs to really make sure everyone is included. What we're also doing is some sort of a monitoring mechanism, because obviously as a policy institution, the accountability is key. We say what we do, and often we are accused of producing a lot of paper, but we also need to show that we're walking the talk, and then we're walking it in the right way. And there we have mechanisms that, for example, the Better Internet for Kids strategy will be, we will have biannual reviews with youth panels. We have Better Internet for Kids youth ambassadors that monitor this, with whom we work. Our own child rights strategy will have a review by children as well, and young and key stakeholders to tell us whether we are on the right track or not. Again, what we've done as well is we have developed, not we, but child-friendly versions of our initiative. So I have one here. It's the European Strategy for Better Internet for Kids, as you see. And this one is also online and has been developed by children themselves, by school children, how they see our policies. And we did not edit, we did not interfere. And this is a way also to give ownership, to co-create, to be more inclusive. In-house, we're really trying to establish this culture across the board. Many other organizations, also the UN, others are already working on this. And this is really a way to slowly build, because it's a culture of participation, of respect, and of inclusion, which is really key. And also what we're doing now, we develop an online child participation platform. This one, again, it will be launched finally, probably operational in March or April, but we are co-creating it again with children. They are part of it, and they're part of the design. And again, we address all the points, respecting their needs. We empower them because they're part of it, they own it, and we protect them. And by protecting, meaning that they tell us, okay, this is the safe space I can operate in, and I feel comfortable in.
Thank you so much for also sharing that very practical example that you have of how people can find out and learn more about the policies that impact them and affect them. There's a saying that goes, it takes an ecosystem to change an ecosystem. And it's been a real pleasure having the three of you representing very different parts of the learning ecosystem with me here on LPTV today. Thanks to Iris, to Mart and Sebastian for helping us understand the role that policy plays in equality in online learning, and to all of our speakers in this part of our program dedicated to access to quality education. You can hear more about this tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Central European Time with the first Imagination TV episode of the festival, which will be looking at inspiring initiatives to provide access to learning, notably for refugees. Now, if you've just tuned into LPTV, we want you to know that all of our programs are going to be available on replay. So if you missed Mohamad talking about how he created a school in a refugee camp, or if you want to learn about Libraries Without Borders, or you're feeling frustrated because perhaps there's a session that you know you're going to miss later today or later this week, make sure you subscribe to the Learning Planet's YouTube channel, because that's where we're going to be posting all of our videos for you to share and watch as many times as you like. And if you can't find what you're looking for, just drop us a message on our Discord server. There's a button to join next to this live stream, and there's a button on the festival website. So you can easily connect with us and meet the team, pepper us with your questions, get to know the rest of the Learning Planet community. Everyone is waiting for you there. Thank you.